Welcome to the Korean Billionaire Love Stories. The channel will bring you stories of strong bonds, cultural differences, passionate love, and unforgettable dramatic events. If you love interracial love stories and cinematic storytelling, then this is the place for you. Enjoy listening. Please subscribe to the channel to hear more great stories. 3 guns were pointed at me the moment I opened the door. The men holding them did not shout. They did not rush forward. They simply stood there on my front porch under the yellow glow of the security light, calm and patient, like men who had done this many times before. Behind them stood Roman Petrov, a tall man with cold gray eyes and a long dark coat that hung heavy against the Houston night air. He looked exactly the same as the last time I had seen him, sitting across the dinner table from my husband. The only difference was that tonight he was not smiling. My husband, Choi Min-jae, always told me that his world was dangerous, but that I would never have to face that danger myself. He promised that no matter how complicated his business became, no matter how many enemies he made across the ports and oil routes of the Gulf, I would always be protected. Standing there in the doorway with 3 weapons pointed at my chest, I realized something important. Min-jae was currently 12 time zones away in Singapore. For a moment, none of us spoke. The humid night air pressed against my skin, and the distant sound of trucks from the highway rolled across the quiet neighborhood. Our house sat on the edge of Houston, near the shipping districts, close enough to the ports that tankers could sometimes be heard groaning through the water late at night. Normally, that sound comforted me. It meant the business was running. The empire my husband had built was moving like a massive machine across the ocean. Tonight, it only reminded me that the man who controlled all of it was not here. Roman Petrov studied my face as if he were measuring my reaction. Most people expected fear when they pointed guns at someone's front door. I suppose that was reasonable. I had spent years as a social worker before meeting Min-jae. I had seen fear in many different forms. I had seen people break down, cry, scream, or run when they believed their lives were about to end. But something strange happened in my mind during those first few seconds. Instead of panic, a quiet clarity settled over me. "Good evening, Roman," I said. One of the men holding a gun shifted slightly, surprised by the calm in my voice. Roman raised a hand, and the man froze again. "You recognize me," Roman said slowly. "Of course," I replied. "You have eaten in this house." That much was true. 2 years earlier, Roman Petrov had been one of Min-jae's most valuable partners. His shipping routes from Eastern Europe had connected perfectly with the oil logistics network Min-jae controlled through the Houston ports. Together, they had moved millions of barrels through channels no government agency could fully track. I had sat at the dinner table and listened to them talk about business as if they were discussing weather patterns. Now, he stood on my porch with armed men. "My husband is not home," I said. "I know," Roman replied. That answer told me everything I needed to know. He stepped forward slightly, just enough that the porch light caught the edge of his expression. There was no anger in his face, only calculation. "Your husband betrayed me," he said. Then Roman Petrov walked past me and into the house. Roman Petrov walked into the house as if he had every right to be there. The 3 men followed him without speaking, their boots heavy against the hardwood floor of the entry hall. One of them closed the front door behind us with a quiet click that sounded far louder than it should have in the silent house. Another man remained close to my left shoulder, his weapon angled low but ready. The third moved ahead and quickly scanned the hallway, checking corners and windows with the careful movements of someone trained to expect resistance. It was a professional routine, efficient, controlled. They were not here for chaos. They were here for a message. Roman removed his coat slowly and draped it over the back of a chair near the entrance. He looked around the house with a calm curiosity that made the situation feel almost surreal. My husband had spent years building this place. The house sat on a quiet stretch of land outside the busiest shipping districts of Houston, hidden behind tall hedges and iron gates. It was supposed to be the one place where business stayed outside, a place where the violence of Min-jae's world stopped at the driveway. Roman seemed amused by that idea. "Nice home," he said as he walked into the living room. I followed him carefully. Running was not an option. Panic would only make the men with guns nervous, and nervous men with guns made mistakes. I had learned that much during my years working with families in crisis. Fear spreads quickly in a room. but calm spreads too if someone is willing to hold onto it long enough. Roman sat down on a large leather sofa as if he were a guest visiting for drinks. One of the armed men remained near the door, another positioned himself by the window, and the third stood directly behind me. The quiet placement of their bodies created a triangle of control that kept every exit covered. Roman leaned forward slightly and rested his hands together. "You already know why I am here," he said. "I know you said my husband betrayed you," I replied. "That is correct." His voice carried a faint Russian accent, the words slow and deliberate. He was studying my face again, watching carefully for signs of fear or confusion. "Min Jae made a deal behind my back," Roman continued. "A new route for oil shipments through Mexico." That confirmed the rumor I had overheard 2 weeks earlier while Min Jae was speaking on the phone late at night. I had not meant to listen, but voices carried easily in a quiet house. He had been discussing a partnership with a cartel that controlled tanker movement along certain Gulf routes. If that deal had gone through without Roman's involvement, it would have cut his Eastern European network out of a massive portion of the operation. "You believe he replaced you," I said. Roman smiled faintly. "I do not believe. I know." One of the men by the window shifted his stance slightly, adjusting his grip on the weapon. The movement was small but intentional. It reminded me that this conversation had a time limit. Roman had not come here simply to discuss business. "I came to send a message," he said calmly. "And what message is that?" Roman tilted his head slightly toward the gunman. "That betrayal has consequences." For a moment, no one spoke. The air inside the room felt heavier, thick with tension that pressed against my chest. Outside, somewhere in the distance, a cargo truck rumbled along the highway toward the ports. The sound faded quickly, leaving the house wrapped in silence again. I knew exactly what Roman meant. In his world, messages were rarely delivered through phone calls or emails. They were delivered through loss, through pain, through actions that forced the enemy to understand that lines had been crossed. "You intend to hurt him through me," I said. Roman's expression did not change. "That depends on how tonight goes." The man behind me shifted again. I could feel the quiet pressure of the gun aimed somewhere between my shoulders. The situation had reached the point where most people would start begging or crying. I could almost see Roman waiting for that reaction, expecting the moment when fear would break through my calm. Instead, I walked past him and into the kitchen. 3 guns followed my movement instantly. I opened the cabinet and took out 4 glasses. Then I reached into the refrigerator and pulled out a bottle of bourbon Min Jae, kept for guests. When I returned to the living room, Roman was watching me with open curiosity. "You are not afraid," he said. "Fear would not improve this conversation," I replied. I set the glasses on the table and poured the bourbon, carefully, my hands steady. "Please," I said, gesturing toward the drink in front of him. "Sit comfortably. If we are going to discuss the future of an oil empire, we should at least do it properly." One of the gunmen glanced at Roman, waiting for instructions. Roman picked up the glass. For the first time since entering the house, he leaned back slightly against the sofa. "You are very different from what I expected," he said. I sat down across from him. "That is usually an advantage," I replied. Roman took a slow sip of the bourbon and studied me again. "You know what happens if I kill your husband," he said. I met his eyes calmly. "Yes," I answered. "And yet you invited me to sit down." "That is because killing him would be a mistake." Roman raised one eyebrow. "Explain." I folded my hands together and spoke carefully. "If you kill my husband, Roman, you inherit a port full of enemies." Roman did not interrupt me. That alone told me the conversation had shifted. Men like Roman Petrov did not sit quietly while someone explained why they should abandon revenge unless they believed there was something valuable in the explanation. The 3 gunmen remained perfectly still around the room, but I could feel their attention tightening. They were listening now, even if their boss was the only one who would make the decision. Roman placed his glass back on the table and leaned slightly forward. "You believe I am afraid of enemies?" he asked. "I believe you are smart enough to count them," I replied. The faintest smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Continue." I nodded slowly. The key to this moment was not confidence alone. It was credibility. Roman had built his empire by recognizing patterns in power, and if I sounded like someone repeating secondhand information, he would see through it immediately. So I spoke about the world he understood. If Min Jae dies tonight, the first thing that happens is chaos in the port, I said. Your men might think that chaos is an opportunity, but the Houston docks do not belong to one man. They belong to a network. Roman's expression remained neutral, but his eyes sharpened. You know about the network. I have lived beside it for 5 years. That was true. My husband had tried to keep his business away from me, but proximity teaches you things whether you want to learn them or not. Long phone calls at midnight, quiet meetings in the kitchen with trusted captains from the shipping yards, conversations about tanker schedules and pipeline access whispered through half-closed doors. Patterns appear if you pay attention long enough. If Min Jae dies, I continued, the Korean crews who run the terminals will blame you. They will shut the port down before they let you take it. The Mexican cartel will move in to claim the routes Min Jae promised them. And the federal investigators who have been circling the shipping districts for years will suddenly find a reason to look closer. Roman said nothing. I leaned slightly forward. You will not inherit his empire. You will inherit a war. One of the gunmen by the window shifted again. Roman noticed the movement but did not turn his head. You speak with confidence, he said slowly. But perhaps war is acceptable to me. That would surprise me, I replied. War is bad for business. Roman picked up the glass again, but did not drink. And what do you suggest instead? That question was the opening I had been waiting for. If you walk away tonight, I said, you inherit a partner. The words hung in the room for several seconds. Even the men with guns seemed momentarily confused. Roman tilted his head. You are offering a deal. I am explaining reality. Your husband made a deal without me. Yes, I said, and that was a mistake. Roman's eyes narrowed slightly. He had not expected that answer. But mistakes can be corrected, I continued. I stood slowly and walked to the large window that overlooked the distant lights of the shipping district. Even from this distance, the faint glow of cranes and tanker docks painted the horizon in orange and white. Houston is the gateway for more oil than most countries move in a year, I said. Your Eastern European routes bring product through the Atlantic. Min Jae controls the storage terminals and transport fleets here. I turned back toward Roman. Separately, both of you are powerful. Then I paused. Together, you control the entire corridor. Roman leaned back slightly again. And you think your husband will agree to this? I think your alternatives are worse. He studied me carefully. I could see the calculations running behind his eyes now. The mental process of a man who had survived decades in a brutal industry by making the right decision when it mattered. What happens if I kill you instead? He asked. I did not hesitate. Then my husband burns everything. Roman raised one eyebrow. You are very certain of that? Yes. Why? Because he loves me. The answer was simple, honest, and impossible to argue with. If I die tonight, I continued, Min Jae will not negotiate. He will not calculate losses. He will not care about profit. He will destroy every shipping route you have across this coast just to make sure you suffer first. The room went quiet again. Roman finally took a slow drink from the glass. You are threatening me. No, I said calmly. I am warning you. One of the gunmen spoke for the first time. Boss. Roman raised a finger and the man fell silent again. Roman looked at me for a long moment. The tension in the room had changed shape now. It was no longer the tension of imminent violence. It was the tension of decision. Finally, Roman placed the empty glass on the table. You understand this world better than your husband expected, he said. I understand people, I replied. The rest is just logistics. Roman stood up slowly. The men with guns straightened immediately, waiting. Roman walked toward me until he was standing only a few feet away. His eyes searched my face one more time, as if looking for the smallest sign that this entire conversation had been an act of desperation rather than strategy. Then he laughed softly. Your husband married a very dangerous woman, he said. Roman's laughter faded slowly, but the tension in the room did not disappear with it. The 3 men who had entered my house with guns were still standing exactly where they had positioned themselves earlier, their weapons lowered but not holstered. Roman turned slightly and looked at them. And in that brief moment, I understood that the next few seconds would decide whether this night ended in negotiation or blood. Lower them, Roman said calmly. The men hesitated only for a moment before obeying. One by one the weapons tilted toward the floor. The change was small, but it shifted the air in the room instantly. Violence was no longer inevitable. It had become optional. Roman walked slowly across the living room, stopping near the table where the half-empty glasses of bourbon still sat untouched. He looked down at them as if considering something, then picked up the bottle and poured himself another drink. "You understand what you are asking," he said without looking at me. "Yes," I replied. "You are offering partnership in a business your husband did not even allow you to enter." "That was his choice," I said. Roman lifted the glass and took a slow sip. The amber liquid caught the warm light from the kitchen behind us. "And you believe you can speak for him?" I met his eyes. "I believe I can speak for the future." Roman watched me carefully again. Men like him built their power on instinct as much as strategy. They could sense weakness in a room the way predators sensed blood in water. If he believed I was bluffing, this conversation would end very differently. "You are confident your husband will accept this arrangement," Roman said. "I am confident he will prefer it to a war that destroys both of you." Roman turned his head slightly toward the window that overlooked the distant shipping yards. Even from here, the cranes stood like giant metal skeletons against the horizon, their lights blinking slowly above the endless rows of containers. "That port feeds half the Gulf," Roman said quietly. "Yes. And your husband controls it. For now." Roman looked back at me. "You are honest. It saves time." He smiled again, but this time the expression carried more respect than amusement. One of the gunmen shifted near the doorway. "Boss," he said carefully, "we should move." Roman did not respond immediately. He walked slowly around the room instead, studying the photographs on the wall. Most of them showed ordinary moments from a life that had never truly been ordinary. There was a picture from the year Min-jae and I had married, another from a charity event where we had raised money for a youth program in the city, a third from a quiet evening on the Gulf Coast where the water had stretched endlessly behind us. Roman stopped at that photograph. "You were a social worker," he said without turning around. "Yes." "You helped people." "I tried." Roman looked back at me. "And now you negotiate oil empires with armed men in your living room. Life changes." He studied my face for another long moment. "Do you know what would happen if your husband believed you made this deal without him?" "Yes." "And you are not afraid of that?" I thought about the question carefully before answering. "No," I said finally, "because I know him." Roman nodded slowly, as if that answer confirmed something he had already suspected. Finally, he turned toward his men. "We are leaving," he said. The 3 gunmen immediately stepped away from their positions. One moved toward the door and unlocked it. Another slipped his weapon back beneath his jacket. The third glanced at me briefly before following the others into the hallway. Roman picked up his coat from the chair and slipped it over his shoulders. Before walking out, he stopped beside me. "Tell Min-jae the deal stands," he said. "And if he refuses?" Roman's expression hardened slightly. "Then, next time we will not be drinking bourbon." I nodded once. "That seems fair." Roman walked toward the door and stepped outside into the warm Houston night. The men followed him silently. Within seconds their car engines started in the driveway, and the sound of tires crunching against gravel faded as the vehicles disappeared down the road. For several seconds, I remained standing exactly where I was. Only when the headlights vanished beyond the gate did my body finally release the tension it had been holding. My hands began to tremble. I walked slowly to the door and locked it, checking the handle twice before stepping back into the living room. The house was quiet again. The glasses of bourbon still sat on the table, exactly where we had left them. I sank down onto the sofa and let out a long breath. For the first time that night, the fear finally arrived. Not the sharp panic that people expected in moments of danger, but the heavy realization of how close everything had come to collapsing. One wrong word, one wrong tone, one moment of hesitation, and the entire empire my husband had built could have burned before sunrise. 2 days later, Min-jae returned to Houston. He came straight from the airport, still wearing the dark suit he had flown in. The moment he stepped through the front door, I could see the tension in his face. His people had already told him something had happened here, but no one had been able to explain exactly what. What happened? He asked. I told him everything. The knock on the door, Roman standing on the porch, the guns, the conversation in the living room, the deal. Min Jae did not interrupt once. When I finished speaking, he stood there silently for a long time. Finally, he walked into the living room and looked at the same chair Roman had used earlier. Roman left without violence, he said quietly. Yes. And he agreed to a partnership. Yes. Min Jae looked back at me, his expression unreadable. I always believed I was protecting you from this world, he said. I met his eyes calmly. You were, I replied. He frowned slightly. Then how did you stop a war without me? I gave a small, tired smile, because sometimes the safest way to protect an empire is not with guns. Min Jae stared at me for several seconds before shaking his head slowly in disbelief. In that moment, he realized something that had never occurred to him before. While he had been building power with violence and fear, the person he thought he was protecting had quietly saved everything he built with nothing more than words. When I finished telling Min Jae what had happened that night, the room stayed quiet for a long time. He stood near the window looking out toward the distant glow of the shipping yards. Even from here you could see the lights of the cranes moving slowly above the docks, lifting containers that carried millions of dollars across the ocean every day. That network was the empire he had spent more than a decade building. Every deal, every alliance, every risk had shaped the system that kept those ports moving. Yet, in a single night, that entire machine had nearly collapsed while he was on the other side of the world. Finally, he spoke again. You sat here with Roman Petrov and negotiated the future of my port. I negotiated the future of your war, I corrected gently. Min Jae turned toward me slowly. His expression was not anger. It was something far more complicated. For years he had treated me like the one safe part of his life, the person who existed outside the dangerous structure he operated every day. That belief had guided everything he did. Now that belief had been forced to change. You were never supposed to face that, he said. I know. You could have been killed. Yes. He ran a hand through his hair, something he only did when he was struggling to understand a situation that refused to follow his expectations. I always believed I was protecting you, he said quietly. I walked toward him until we were standing side by side near the window. The distant sound of trucks moving through the shipping districts rolled faintly across the night air. You were protecting me, I said, just not the way you thought. Min Jae looked at me, searching my face as if he were seeing me for the first time. Then he let out a slow breath and shook his head in disbelief. Roman respects you now, he said. He respects the deal. That is the same thing in his world. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The lights from the port flickered across the glass like distant stars. I built this empire believing power came from control, Min Jae said. From fear. From making sure no one ever thought they could challenge me. And sometimes that works, I replied. He gave a small smile, but not this time. No. Min Jae looked out toward the docks again, his voice quieter now. That night, while I was flying across the ocean believing everything was secure, you were here protecting everything I built. I rested my hand gently on his arm. Sometimes protection does not come from violence, I said. Sometimes it comes from stopping violence before it starts. Min Jae nodded slowly. In that moment, he understood something that many powerful men never learn. Empires are not always saved by the people holding the weapons. Sometimes they are saved by the person willing to sit down, pour a drink, and turn enemies into partners. He once believed I was safe in his world because he stood between me and danger. That night proved something far more frightening. His world had been safe because I was standing inside it too. That night changed more than a business deal. It changed the way my husband looked at the world we lived in. For years, Min Jae believed power meant controlling every threat before it could reach our door. But sometimes the strongest defense is not the one that fires first. Sometimes it is the one that knows how to turn danger into opportunity. Roman Petrov walked into our house expecting to start a war. Instead, he walked away with a partnership. And Min Jae walked away with a truth he never expected to learn. The woman he thought he was protecting had protected his entire empire when he was not there. Now I want to hear from you. If 3 armed men showed up at your door while your partner was gone, What would you have done? Would you panic, fight, or try to negotiate like I did? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy powerful stories about family, loyalty, and unexpected strength, do not forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story.